Hey everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the Altered Insights podcast. I'm joined here today by Trickster. Kawa is once again unable to join us this week, and it's a little unfortunate circumstances. He wanted to be here, but he had some family commitments he had to deal with here. So, Trickster, it's you and I once again this week. Former champ, still the champ, actually. Why am I saying former? You are still the champion of Arizona. How you doing this week, buddy?
Doing good. It's good to be back. Hoping at some point we can get the whole gang together here with Kawa. But while he's away, we'll do our best to keep this podcast running for all you out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so much fun to get to talk about Altered. And I actually love this game. I love talking about it. And I have the privilege of speaking to one of the absolute best players in the world at it. So this is a treat for me all the way around. Not only do I get to make content that I enjoy, but I get to talk to someone who I absolutely respect as well. So it's a win all around. To get us started here this week, Trickster, let's take a quick little intro into what we've been playing this week. If we've changed anything up, if we've been experimenting with something different. Trickster, we'll start with you. What have you been playing this week?
So I'm people are gonna get their pitchforks out, but I actually have found that I really enjoy playing Waru, especially after the Gamers Guild tournament. But what I feel like I've already kind of like found close to the most optimal version of the list. And so what I've been experimenting this week is I've been trying to prepare for potential bans or nerfs that have been hinted at in an AMA. So in Ask Me Anything from Altered, they did have one of the members of Equinox make a statement that they didn't expect Robin to be received the way it has been, and that they feel like it creates a bad play experience. So I've been trying to play Waru without Robin Hood with 0 copies of that card this week, and just seeing like if the deck would still be viable without that kind of like name card that everyone really thinks like is. It's almost like Waru is Robin Hood, like they're one and the same at this point. So I've been seeing how the deck can perform without Robin Hood, and I've been having a pretty good time. When you play it on Board Game Arena and you never play a Robin Hood, you don't get as much hate in the chat. Like people don't really get mad at you because they don't see the annoying cards. So yeah, it's been a pretty good play experience, and I still feel like the deck has legs even without Robin Hood. It's been fun to play, and I think my win rate's been pretty good. But it also doesn't get any of those like free auto wins anymore, and so yeah, I think it's been a pretty good experience all around for me and the people I've been playing against.
So on that note, do you feel like this is a great example of what you kind of talked about last week, where you said that overall the bureaucrats list was just fully fleshed out and fully capable of winning on its own right, and that Robin Hood, while being obviously a key component of that, wasn't necessarily the star of the show, and that it was the fact that it was such a well-rounded archetype that made it stand out amongst the rest?
Yeah, I still absolutely believe that. I mean, like one example is you have Ozma, a common 1/2/1, draw a card from hand and reserve. And then you'll look at the most similar card in other decks, and then you have something like Ada Lovelace, which has the exact same stats, but it takes a rare slot, and it only draws a card the second time you play it. It also has a cost associated with it that you have to like put a card from your hand in reserve. So I don't know, you just see here, it's like on a common card, not a rare card, you're getting like a stronger effect almost than one of the best cards in Traced. And so I think that there just is a lot of value. I think the condition here, it's supposed to be really high that you have to control 3 other characters. But the way things work with War right now, I think a lot of things just line up where your conditions are essentially free because they just happen to line up with what you're doing anyway. So yeah, I do feel like the deck is still very strong. I kind of want to make a video maybe to go over some of these points eventually. But yeah, one of the things I found is normally in Altered, since things get reset every day, if you have like mega overkill on one day and win both sides, you can't really take advantage of that and carry it over to the next day. You just reset. But I feel like one of the strongest things too about Waru is just if you ever have any extra value, you can just put it into another sleeping bureaucrat and kind of bank it for the next day. So you never really overkill your opponent. You can, and if you do, you just have more value to keep things going on the next day. And I think that flexibility to play any card as something for this day or the next day, yeah, it just kind of really puts it over the top. And so yeah, I still feel like even without Robin Hood, it would be a great deck. One of the hardest things I found is since Robin Hood is so expensive, you actually do need to play some other more expensive cards to not run out of gas. So that's something I'm still trying to figure out what could take that spot. But overall, I think that it'd be like a pretty powerful deck even without Robin Hood.
It's interesting to hear you talk about like overkilling your opponent, because I feel like I do that in like say Muna decks where you anchor
Mm.
something and you kind of build it up, you boost it and all this stuff, and the next thing you know it kind of just marches, right? It just stays there, it's anchored, and it just kind of marches, and that's great. That's a great problem to have. But your opponent's like, I'm just not playing that. You know what I mean? And that's kind of interesting. But obviously, if you're against a Ysmir player or someone with removal, that can be a different conversation. If they slide a little, studious disciple there, then all of a sudden your coniferal cone man gets deleted from the board, and you're like, well, that's kind of sad, I guess. But hey, that's the game, I guess. But I do like what you're saying there. The idea of being able to use like a sleep to kind of manage your board and carry over power into that next turn, and obviously the effects that are running into those next turns as well. Now for me, this week has been all around brewing and testing a Fonus. Like I have been all in on Fonus, and I actually love the way the archetype plays. I have a ton of fun with it, and it's just one of those heroes that I think I was so happy to see that it actually excelled as much as it did in the competitive side, because I think this is a fascinating hero. I think Ysmir naturally wants to be casting spells. It's what they're best at. And if you're able to create boosts and actually generate value based on your spell casting, then suddenly I think that you're able to disproportionately benefit from the cards you're drawing, and of course have like this kind of like this cycle that exists, right? I'm able to draw cards, build my hand, while also boosting my board presence, while disrupting the opponent. I feel like it is this awesome like spell casting build I've been having so much fun with. I've been like brewing and testing this one deck over the last couple weeks, trying to like refine it here and there. But have you had much experience playing a Fonus?
I do like this hero a lot. It's probably in my top 3 or so favorite heroes, at least like top 6 or whatever. But I think this one's very popular because, yeah, that spell slinging archetype is just like such a fan favorite that you can find in other trading card games and kind of just feel at home when you switch over to Altered. I think, too, this hero has some of the most potential to grow because its hero power is like insane. The fact that you can get a boost every time you play a spell means that in future lists or with like the right cards, you could get a lot more value out of this power than you can from some of like the starter deck heroes where they're limited to like 1 boost per turn or 1 token per turn. And so yeah, I think that this hero definitely excites me. It's fun to play, and I do think there's just so much potential for it to go like to the moon in the future. I think that too, this hero can really do some cool things with uniques because most of your deck is spells, so the couple of characters you do play have to be like really important. And since uniques are only characters, there you can kind of get like this opportunity to like shape almost like half of the characters you play in your deck will be uniques, and so you can really change its play style by how you mix those up.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of the reasons why I went with a Fonus and Ysmir in particular is because I found that I had uniques that I think carried the archetype very well, and that'll lead into our next conversation we have, and I can even show those uniques. But like overall, like it's been really funny trying to like design the optimum deck, because like there's so many different approaches that you can take in any particular archetype with any particular hero. And so, like, for instance, there's some characters in the Ysmir decks here that work well with a Fonus. You have something like the Blade Dancer, right? The fact that it kind of carries over with the season effect, I think is super valuable, right? Not only is it gaining boost when it comes in from reserve or when it comes in from your hand, but it's also because it's seasoned and a Fonus is casting spells. This thing can get rapidly big very, very fast, and also maintain the boosts for a relatively inexpensive power, because it's not coming in as a 2-1 for me, right? It's coming in as a 2-4 from the reserve or whatever. And then you're able to obviously remove the fleeting with helping hand and all those types of things, right? So I actually really, really like this particular card. And it's funny because like I have choices with maybe, do you go with something like a red? Do you go like, so you have these very interesting choices that you can make.
Yeah, there is a lot of options, and even in a similar way, you could just use like an anchored character, and while it doesn't maintain those boosts with seasoned, since you do get the card to stick around for 2 days in a row, that's another way to just double the value you get out of a Faunus with either anchored or seasoned. Yeah, just being able to get that boost value to stick around on your board for more than one day.
Yeah, and that's actually what I ultimately decided to do. Like while I was crafting this deck, I originally didn't have Sneezer Shroom in the deck, and then I found myself thinking to myself, you know what? Like Sneezer Shroom is too good. It's too good. Not only is it gaining kind of a boost at noon, which is nice, right? It helps to give it that much more even stat line, but you're boosting it very consistently with a Fonus's ability. And you're right, it sticks around. It sticks around from both preserve and from hand, and it just generates that like that sticky presence that's very valuable. Now, obviously, at 2 cost, there's a lot of things I want to remove it. But in my deck, I also run things like meditation training, so I could re-anchor it, right? And keep it on the board, which I find to be particularly helpful. And like again, it's interesting that there's so many different options that you can kind of like attack with, right? Because like red seems like a different flavor of what the Blade Dancer provides, right? And so like I tackle the idea of like, okay, would I rather run red? Would I rather run the Blade Dancer, right? Both are seasoned, but both generate value in slightly different ways. But with a Fonus, I feel like they kind of step on each other's toes. So like, here's an interesting question for you. How do you make that distinction between like which card is the one you want to go to? Like you have the seasoned red, you have the seasoned Blade Dancer. You're trying to min-max your build. One is a 1/2, one is a 2/2. What ultimately tips one in favor of the other for you, Trickster?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that right now I go towards the Blade Dancer because from the reserve, they'll basically both be a 2/2/2 for 2 plus whatever boost you put on it. But Blade Dancer gets to be 1/1/1 for 1 the first day instead of having that same 2 cost for 2 stat line. And I think right now that makes the Blade Dancer feel really good because on day 1 you can do things like playing it with Off You Go or another 2 cost spell, maybe even like a meditation training. And so I think that, yeah, the lower cost from hand right now can just let you fit it into your curve a little bit better. And then by the second time you play it, you'll have more mana when you're playing it from the reserve, so it kind of evens out. I do think, though, there would be times in the future where red could be better, and one example would be if your deck resupplies a lot, because the Blade Dancer is 0/0/0 naturally, and it only builds up those boosts to be a 2/2/2 if you play it once from hand first before the reserve. So, in a list in the future with more cards like Spycraft, where you're putting cards straight into the reserve, you might be kind of sad that you have this 0/0/0 Blade Dancer that's only going to get 1 boost when it comes into play. And there, I would think maybe red, which always has the consistent stats, could be like a better fit.
And that again is like that's the min-maxing side of the game, which I really do appreciate. You have like all these options that you want to kind of make best use of, right? Especially when it comes to like out of faction rares, which I still think is one of the coolest elements of the game. You don't often have that opportunity to play cards like red out of faction and kind of mix and match kind of deck archetypes. And so like that to me is really, really exciting. So yeah, for me, it's been a Fonus all week. I've been legitimately loving it. And I'm hoping to continue kind of brewing and kind of getting my deck to exactly where I want it. But we are going to be doing a bit of a conversation about uniques here, and it's going to be the core topic of this week. Now, uniques are kind of interesting, and we kind of alluded to the fact prior that part of the reason why I was playing a Fonus was because I had a number of uniques that I felt were absolutely incredible. And so I wanted to lean into that. So here is a great example of a unique that, like I said, this is a great Fonus card, and I think I can build around it. It's a 5/4 Flamel with 4/5/3 stat line, and it reads, from hand, you may put a card from your hand in reserve. If it's a spell, draw 3 cards. And then from reserve, it reads, you may return a spell from your reserve to your hand. And when I saw this, I'm like, damn, this is a perfect Fonus card, and I think I'm going to build around it. And so, like, I'd be interested in your thoughts. When you pull a unique that tends to lend itself directly to a specific archetype, does it encourage you to build around it? And how would you approach building a deck with a unique that you feel can carry an archetype?
Yeah, I definitely think that unique cards can inspire new lists and different ways of like playing a hero, as you're alluding to. I think, yeah, it's interesting. Right now, I'm trying to think of like the best example. One card that I pulled that could possibly inspire something like this is a Quetzalcoatl that at dusk will draw 3 cards if you control a token. And so that kind of introduces a way of playing Waru where all of a sudden now you can draw 3 cards the first day you play it and 3 cards the second day when it's still on the board. 6 new cards in hand. That's like something you've never seen before. All of a sudden now I'm trying to build my deck with a lot more 1-drops and cheap cards to take advantage of having so many cards in hand or something like that. And then, yeah, like for a Fonus like this, if you have a card that's like, oh, let's put a card from your hand in reserve, now it brings you this opportunity where you can run cards that maybe weren't as good before, but they pair well with it. And so something I'd think of with putting cards from my hand in the reserve is I'd run more fleeting cards at that point, because cards with fleeting usually have a stronger effect, but it's balanced out by the fact you can only play them once. But if you're going to be putting your cards straight to your reserve anyway, you'll only be playing them once to begin with. So maybe you can kind of pair that with these really strong fleeting cards to just kind of get extra value. And over time, different opportunities like this, you might be able to find a list that does have an edge over like the competition. So yeah, I think that if you get like a cool unique card, don't just slot it into the deck that already exists that like you found online, but think about what new opportunities does this present me with that weren't available before, and should I swap out some of my cards? One good example I've seen is I think Aloe Vera is typically the best Muna anchored 4-drop. It's a 3-drop, but it's theoretically a 4-drop when you use the effect. But I think with some uniques, all of a sudden maybe Cone Man can be better, because Cone Man has the on-play effect to anchor itself, while Aloe Vera has the on-play effect where you have to pay 1 to anchor itself. And so when I find certain uniques that let me reactivate my on-play effects, all of a sudden I'd rather have Cone Mans because I don't have to pay 1 again to re-anchor them with this unique's ability, whereas Aloe Vera, I would have to pay that 1 to be able to get the anchor. And so, yeah, sometimes I think that uniques absolutely should change the way you build your deck if you want to kind of find that optimal list to go with them.
Yeah, and for me, another thing that happened was I pulled another Flamel unique, which was just bizarre that I happened to pull 2 back to back. This one, a 3/3/4/2/4 that reads, at dusk, you may return a spell from your reserve to your hand. I'm like, I might actually be able to make a little bit of an infinity loop here. And so, like, I thought to myself, okay, this one's a little cheaper and et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of interesting to think that like now I have these 2 options that I can utilize in the deck crafting and try to take advantage of what kind of what spells I can add to my my reserve, utilize. But then it's also notable that something like Off You Go is much more expensive from reserve, right? So you have to be very cognizant of which cards you're putting down, what's in your hand. But I often found myself with these very large hand sizes, which as a Ysmir player was super advantageous because I felt like I had all the answers and my opponent was just asking questions, right? It was asking questions of how can I possibly win this game? I had some of the most lopsided games with my hand advantage, thanks to what I was able to do with Ysmir. So, so I actually really do like the idea of utilizing these uniques, but it's not all good stuff though, right? We have a lot of questions about uniques, a lot of concerns about uniques as well, and we'll need to touch on that. So we've just already covered that essentially uniques can be a deck building tool and kind of inspirational for deck building, but we still do not have the marketplace yet, right? The marketplace is a bit of a, we'll say a wild card. Now, we're going to be doing an episode in the future about like general economy stuff about around the marketplace once it gets closer to launch or once it has launched. But right now we can only speculate what it's going to do to the unique meta and the demand for uniques. It's likely that with the release of the marketplace, the demand for uniques are going to be very intense. Very intense. And so I kind of get concerned as to how uniques could start to impact the integrity of competitive play if you're able to utilize a marketplace and simply, there's a Robin Hood effect unique on a whatever card. It costs $80, but that effect's so good, I'm just going to spend that $80 and buy that effect, right? The person who's selling it has a smile on their face, but it starts to skirt an issue, right?
I feel like $80 is optimistic. I'd almost be like $800 or something. Like, you never know at this point. It's like until the dust settles, I'd be worried that like prices could be much higher for highly sought after cards. If you think about how many of the names there are for uniques in the set, it's like over 100 names. You get like 5 per display, but not even every copy of the name is going to have that effect. Who knows? Like some of these chase cards, there might be only like a handful of them in the world. I'm sure, I don't know, prices could go possibly much higher and cause a lot more stress for some of these players.
That's a great point, actually, right? I was just throwing a number out there just to get started for what I think like the average really good unique might be. But what you're suggesting is like, yeah, so if you have a unique with that Robin Hood effect that also has something else, like it's just a cracked unique, people would be willing to spend the big bucks on it. So like, I don't want to use the term pay to win. Like I that's not the kind of term I like using freely, because obviously I think that that Equinox has done what they can to obviously try to mitigate the randomness and the effects that these uniques can have. They're not designed to be game breaking, right? They're designed to be unique, right? However, you can get these unique infinite combinations, which create these, let's just say, incredibly powerful effects, even for their cost. And as a result, you're right. Because it's unique and it's a one-off theoretically, despite the fact that I'm sure there'll be other cards that have similar style effects, there's a chance they could be commanding extremely high prices. And what if there's a moment where that algorithm falters and it prints something that's absolutely actually stupid? You know what I mean? Do you ban just one unique, or do you let it sell for the $800 like you're suggesting before? There's a lot of questions that goes around this marketplace specifically. So I'd be interested in hearing some of your concerns or ideas around uniques in terms of competitive play.
I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I feel like it almost needs to like be broken down into a couple like different subtopics or something just to be able to like address it all. So I'm glad we have this whole podcast, I guess, today too, to be going over these thoughts. But I think I want to like start at just like the very, very like basic. What is like the idea of pay to win, maybe for someone who's hearing this for the first time, and what might that look like? And I think that in order for something to be pay to win, you would have to have certain cards be better than other cards. If every card in the game was the same power level, then it wouldn't matter how much you were spending on cards, because the common cards that you get easily are as strong as maybe like the more rare cards, and so it wouldn't give you a gameplay advantage. So I think that the worry would be that certain cards will be like disproportionately better than the other cards that are available to the majority of the player base. And so for commons and rare cards, I think that those are so plentiful at like the drop rates that they're at right now. I don't feel like those will ever be a problem, even if something like maybe like the rare Bravos Bastion or something becomes very popular. I feel like it still shouldn't be much more than ever like $20, and like even that sounds pretty crazy, because there will just be enough that everyone can get them. But for these unique cards, if, for example, we have like a unique card that says draw 3 cards, and then we also have the exact same one that says like draw 2 cards or draw 1 card, obviously, like if all of the costs and stats are the same, competitive players are going to want the one that says draw 3 cards. And this situation might be where something can become pay to win, because not everyone will be able to get the one that draws 3 cards, since a lot of them just say draw 2 or draw 1. And at that point, when something's really scarce, how do you decide who gets to have it? Well, the way things go with trading card games most often is just whoever is willing to pay the most money is going to be the person who gets to put that card into their deck. And so maybe first we should talk about a little bit like for these unique cards, and from the effects we've seen, how do they feel balanced, and does it seem like some of them are significantly overtuned compared to the others? Because if every unique card you pulled from a display was at an equal power level, then it wouldn't really matter how much money people had and which ones they're trying to buy, because you could just go crack open a display at your local game store and have enough uniques to fill a deck. So I guess it's just kind of comes from the question, and I'd like to hear your thoughts. From like the uniques you've seen, do you feel like they are all maybe on the same power level, or do you feel like that there is kind of like a spectrum that might create this scenario where the best ones are less common and significantly more desirable than like an average unique?
That is such a hard question to answer. So in my collection, I have 45 uniques, and they range from a whole bunch of different stuff. And I often find that, again, we're not the algorithm experts, right? But I'm often finding that the actual base card seems to influence the effect to some degree. And there's often a secondary effect and a modification of its stat line that would make it unique. Now, if you're talking about actual power level, right? do they kind of feel like they're a little bit of a, like you're getting a bit of a bonus? I lean towards yes. Like if you think about what like baseline stats are, I feel like these often have effects that would exceed the baseline stat. You're getting a little more for your buck here. But with that being said, like I have cards that like I'm just picking random cards here, but I have cards that I find a little awkward to play, and that the effect might not actually be worth it all the time. And it might just be a discard from reserve effect that's a little different or interesting, or they have these, obviously they're unique effects, but I don't always feel like they fit into what these current archetypes are designed to do all the time. And so I sometimes wonder if these are the type of cards that age like fine wine. Whereas, like, for instance, I might have this Ouroboros Incaster, which is a 4/2/3/4/3 that when another robot joins your expeditions, because it's an Axiom unique, if you control a token, you may return a card from your reserve to your hand. Kind of a very unique, like, thing right there. That's a unique effect. Might not be overly applicable at this current moment, but maybe in the future, this would be a card that I could maybe sell for whatever. Let's say I sell it for $20 today. But if I hold on to it, perhaps this will be the perfect unique 2 years down the road when a new set comes out. And it's exactly what you need because you're running robots all over the place. And this actually works very well. So I don't know, man. I tend to lean towards, I think uniques are slight. I don't want to use the word power crept, but it feels like they're tuned slightly stronger than their average common or rare counterpart, which I think is fair. However, I also think that some of the effects are so random that the cards aren't good. Just because a card's unique doesn't mean it's good. Because I have a lot of uniques, I'm like, I'm never playing this. Like, this will never work appropriately in the deck that I have. And not that it has an effect that fundamentally does not work. It just doesn't work with the way that I believe Altered's currently being played. And so, just because it's unique doesn't mean it's good. But I do think there are cards, specifically the uniques, that are slightly more powerful than their counterparts, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I feel like you have kind of this progression with the common card to the rare card where you essentially get like at least one more mana worth of value one of the 2 times it's played, or maybe the better ones you even get it both times it's played. And I think that from general experience, I have a similar feeling to what you have, of where it feels like the unique cards are getting about at least 1 worth of mana usually better than the rare version. And sometimes it's just like a side grade and it's just different. But a lot of times you do just get a cost reduction or like a stat increase with pretty much the same effect. So I think that the cards do tend to be probably the best cards in your deck if you find the right ones or do it right. I feel like your uniques probably should be your strongest card. And they are limited to 3 per deck and supposed to be the chase card. So I think that it makes sense that they should be somewhat exciting. If people weren't even running them and they were just sticking to commons, it would kind of like take out a part of the game that they have intentionally brought to us and that they want to be utilized. I feel like, that maybe some of my biggest concerns come from, though, not just the fact that all uniques are typically tuned above the rare, to the fact that there seems to be a pretty wide range in that algorithm of where unique cards can show up. And I did use the word concerned a second ago. I don't think that I think everything's like all bad. I'm also like excited. So I feel like that might have been the wrong word. But I think that I do see a wide range often of effects on uniques, which while some people might be like, oh, that's like a problem for balance, it also gets me excited as a deck builder and player, where it feels like it gives me an opportunity to go find these uniques where I feel like the costs and effects line up perfectly to where it's like, oh, the cost isn't even hard to meet, or just to find these uniques that can be the perfect fit for my deck and give me an advantage. And so I think that if it felt like they were all exactly the same, it would almost be unexciting, because you just put the first 3 you get in your deck, and there's no reason to keep hunting to find one that is like a better fit or that can take your deck to that next level. So, I mean, first of all, I think that this difference is a great thing for the game, because it does kind of, compared to a traditional game where you have the set release at the beginning, you know all the cards, it does keep that exploration phase open longer, and it does bring the opportunity to have theoretically more decks available to the players because there are like infinite cards to work with. That means like there's infinite possibilities, and as we've kind of mentioned already, changing one card could change some of the other cards in your list too. The worry comes though in if there are some cards that are so much better than the others, then maybe in a competitive setting it wouldn't make any sense to run like any of the other uniques except for the ones with this effect. And if everybody knows that and everyone agrees, then maybe the prices of those could shoot up tremendously. Some examples of effects like these that I've seen, there are some pretty crazy ones. So for example, in Muna, I have seen effects that say, whenever you play a character, target character with hand cost 3 or less gains anchored. That effect, and most of the effects that I'm going to mention have the potential to kind of compound. Whereas like typical commons and rares say an effect like, when I'm played, do this. Most of the crazy uniques I've seen have a when something happens, do something effect, which can let you get their effects multiple times in a turn, in a day, to be able to really get so much more value. So some of these uniques like this one, it's like, would I ever want to play Muna unique that just says anchor one card when it's played, if I could play a different Muna unique that says anchor like every card you play? And some of these I've even seen, they anchor themselves. So then now you have a card that stays in play for 2 days and anchors every card that you play for after it for the next 2 days. And so some of these uniques are pretty interesting because I feel like, yeah, since they can be so strong, it almost kind of takes away some of the options that I was excited about. If before it felt like, oh, I can pick all of these different uniques, find the one that fits my deck's playstyle, well, maybe something like this comes along, and now it's like, even though that other card was a good fit for this specific deck I'm playing, this unique that anchors all of my cards for 2 days in a row is just so strong, I can't really not justify running it if I did have a way to get a hold of it in any version of my Muna decks.
Yeah, or you just sell it for $5,000 and retire, right? This is kind of the plan, I guess. But yeah, no, that's absolutely cracked. And while you were talking, I thought to myself, I actually have a Muna card that's like that. Not quite the same, obviously, because, well, they're unique. But I have a Lyra Cloth Dancer, a 4/2 with a 4/10 stat line that reads, from hand, you may put a card from your hand in reserve. If you do, I gain 3 boosts. But this is the interesting part of the text, and is what you're referring to. When another character joins your expeditions, up to one target character gains fleeting. Now, this is not quite as cracked as you're gaining anchored, but I'm able to fleet my opponent's cards, right? And that's impactful. They were expecting their cards to stick around or to go to reserve or whatever. I'm just like, no, right? I play a card, and that gets fleeting now. That also gets fleeting. You know what I mean? Oh, I am playing a little, little guy here. Oh, that gets fleeting. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, I'm just losing hand advantage over and over and over again. So this Lyra Cloth Dancer in the Muna, it's a unique, but it also allows me to reproc that effect many times. And that's kind of what you're referencing as one of these, like, it feels like overpowered or overtuned type of effects.
Yeah, I think this is like a perfect example. I think another, I want to say like classic example, but the game's so new, it's like, can anything be classic at this point? But one of like the most sought after uniques that I have not seen go for below like $300 with this effect is for Basira, they have a Foundry Armor in Bravos that says whenever a character gains a boost, summon a Brass Bug 2/2/2 token. And so you take a card that as a rare summoned 1 token from reserve only, and now you get a card that says when you give something a boost, summon a token. It feels like it should be somewhat balanced because it's often hard to boost things, but in a deck that's built around it, you can get something like 4 boosts in a turn. Now all of a sudden you have a 3-drop that has stats of its own, summoning 4 2/2/2 tokens. You're getting like more than Shenlong worth of value, and you can split it between your expeditions on a cheap card. I think something like that, it's almost like the Robin Hood of Basira in my mind, when that deck isn't really in the meta right now, but pretty much anyone who plays that hero, there's not really better uniques than these armorers. If you want to play Basira, if you're not playing armorers like this, you're probably playing like a suboptimal list or one that just doesn't quite have as much power in it. And now all of a sudden, this key card that can do the craziest things for the deck is a unique, a pretty rare unique at that fact. That is the situation where things might be pay to win. I know people in Angers were playing this deck and they spent over $1,000 to get the uniques for their Basir deck. If anyone else wanted to play the deck and they didn't have money like that, it might just not be an option for them, or they'd have to bring like a significantly weaker version.
So you're talking about like definite cost creep there. Like that's something that I was unaware of, right? Because in my locals and stuff that I'm experiencing, people are Canada. We got the launch later. We got it about a month later than most, and so we're still doing some like booster drafts. We're still doing some other stuff. I'm going to my first actual constructed event this weekend, and so like we're a little bit behind on that. So the people that I'm playing with are just they're trying to explore the game. They're not at that point yet, right? But you're right. If you're spending $1,000 on uniques, that is an extremely expensive thing. And I know there's TCG gamers out there who are like, hey, you've never spent $1,000 on a Magic deck, Alex? What are you talking about? Yeah, listen, I get it, okay? We've all been down that dark path, but we don't want that for Altered, right? That's not the point here. And I think what the point is that uniques are supposed to be this exciting thing. It is one of the most innovative things that Altered has done. Like, it actually is really cool. Like, I was at my LGS, I bought a box, and I'm still missing some rares here and there. But I'm like, I want the box. I want to see what uniques I pull, right? And I want to support my LGS as well. I just like cracking packs. What can I say? But like, it was one of those things where I'm like, I like pulling the uniques. I like chasing those cards. But like, we also don't have the marketplace yet. Why would I buy that box to chase those uniques if I could probably just like use that money to just buy the uniques I need on the marketplace, right? So it has this catch-22 of like, in theory, it might actually kind of negatively impact the sales of the boxes, unless you're chasing to open the uniques yourself. Because if you're chasing for the uniques, then you want to open the boxes. But if it's easier just to go to the marketplace and find stuff, then that's a different conversation altogether. And actually, I'm a little concerned about the marketplace. I actually wonder if a worldwide marketplace, if it kind of like just takes its legs out from this kind of like unique chase. Because if you have a worldwide marketplace where you can see every single unique that's up for sale, suddenly it's like it's too easy to find them. I almost wonder if it'd be more gamified and more fun if you actually had to go to your LGS and be like, oh, what uniques does my LGS have today? You know what I mean? And they have like 30 of them, kind of, and you're like, oh, and like you go to a different LGS down the street or to another city, and you're like, hey, let's see what this LGS has. I think the thrill of the hunt would actually be really cool for this game. And when you digitalize it, it's just like, I don't want to say it takes the fun out, but I'm concerned at what this marketplace is going to do to this unique marketplace, because I can very well see it being completely insane, like you've mentioned.
Yeah, this is I feel like it's going to be like a split topic where you're going to have people with very different opinions, because different people enjoy different aspects of Altered. And I think you're absolutely right. Without the online marketplace, it can be pretty hard to find maybe like the cards you want. It's not like you can just get on your computer and know that you'll be able to go look up and buy, if you wish, like the perfect cards for your deck. And we don't know that the online marketplace will be like that or not, but at least as of right now, sometimes you go online and you're just on like a Facebook marketplace or in a Discord somewhere, you only have what's available in front of you to buy. And so oftentimes you might not see anything you want. There might only be a couple hundred cards to look at. Maybe you go to your local game store and go through their binder, but maybe most of the cards were there last week and And so at this point, when you do see that post and suddenly there's like a new card that fits perfectly into your deck, you read this effect you've never seen before, you like reach out to the seller and you buy the card, or you make a trade, that is very fulfilling. And it is like this exciting hunt, because you can't just find all of the cards you want in one day and have them. It does right now take a lot of time and kind of waiting for the right moment for the right cards to pop up to be able to get them. Which, like you're like a Pokemon fan or something, and you're like, oh, I want to catch them all, I want to go on this journey of finding cards, that might be like exactly what you're looking for. But I know that probably like half of the players are more interested in playing the game than doing the unique hunt. And so for some of them, and I've felt this personally, I've felt that to find the unique cards for my deck, I had to be looking online for I was looking for around 2 months, and it took maybe a lot of time every day to go read the updates and find these cards. And I feel like they were so few and far between, or it was such a race that like if a good card went up, it'd be gone in like 30 minutes, that it was a big time investment to be able to find these cards. And so for people who would rather play the game, they either have to give up a lot of the time that they could actually be playing the game with their friends to be looking for cards. And so at that point, it's like maybe they feel like they're wasting the time that they could actually be playing the game to do this hunt, or that they would maybe just have to like spend a lot of money to get the cards that are available and maybe overpriced so they haven't sold, to be able to have those to go play like the game. So it's like you'll either be, I don't know, it's just like a trade-off. If the hunt for uniques is what you look for, this marketplace might be good, but if you just want to be able to focus on playing the game, maybe a more accessible marketplace with a larger range of uniques at your fingertips could kind of be like the solution for you. And I don't know if there's like a right answer, but I definitely see how they'll bring different opportunities. I'm curious though, even with a marketplace, a worldwide marketplace, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're always going to be able to find the cards you want online at like a price you can afford. I've seen in some games chase cards that you like win from tournaments or that are just like really rare pulls. Sometimes they sell out online. And so even though they exist and there is an online marketplace, like a dedicated page to sell them, there might not be any in stock. I think that some of the unique cards I've seen, like I've only seen one ever like them. And at that point, even with an online marketplace, if multiple people are looking for this card, as soon as it shows up on there, it might sell out. And you might have the same situation where you can spend a lot of time going through the online marketplace, but maybe some of the effects or names that you're looking for might not even be on there. And so, yeah, I'm really curious to see what that ends up looking like.
Yeah, obviously we're speculating a lot, right? Like the marketplace has not been released. The game is brand new. The unique pulls and the hunt for uniques has been relegated to either pulling them from boxes or joining Discord groups to try to trade them or whatever, right? So we don't have the full picture yet. And I don't want to like sound all doom and gloomy, right? We're just trying to like have the conversation of like what the future of these unique trades can be. And I do have some concern with, as you said, like this escalating cost of competition, where if you want to be competitive, you gotta have the dough to buy the uniques you need. But that is not different from like some of the decks. Like I remember, I wish Kawa was here, but Kawa telling me about like, oh, one of the top Lorcana decks costs like $700 to build. There's no uniques in that. It just has a couple rares that they like have. There's different rarity levels, right? In Altered, we have 3 rarity levels, really. We have common, rare, and then we have the uniques. We're talking about the most rare versions, but in other games, there's often more staggered versions of cards with differing types of rarities and pull rates, right? We don't generally have that problem. It seems like the rare cards are still difficult to pull here and there, especially with the out of faction numbers as well. But there's less rarities that we're pulling. So the chase for the uniques is somewhat mitigated by the fact that we're not chasing the other cards as much, right? We still are. Like I just finished saying, I don't have all my rares, and so I have to make some kind of like quick substitutions based on what I have and what I don't have. But we are chasing uniques. And it's worth noting that part of the mitigating factor is that like you can only have 3 uniques in a deck, right?
Yeah.
But we had that one situation in Angers where you had the Linway player who had the 3 little sacrifice, the jellyfish. That's incredible. Imagine having 3 uniques. Your 3 slots are 3 identical cards with effects that actually mirror each other to some degree and work in synergy with your deck. And that was able to elevate what was an archetype that people had kind of been questioning in terms of its competitive value into one of the top performers in a competitive tournament. Like, don't tell me the uniques didn't have an impact there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. That was kind of a split too for the top 16, where there were other people with the same story. There was a Fonus player who had 3 Spindle Harvesters that were essentially identical, minus maybe like a discard from reserve, like a support ability. And then you had other players, someone on Sigismar running, I believe I think it was 3 1-drops that all had the support ability to make the next card or permanent you play cost 1 less. So they had 6 cards in their deck now with mechanics that could make their permanents cost less, and they were able to play some of these 5-drop and 6-drop permanents that other Sigismars have foregone. And so, yeah, I definitely think that a lot of players have looked to find uniques of the same name or like the same style to bring that consistency to their deck. And if you only have it's like if you only have one of a card, you can't really expect to see it, and you can't really build around it, because in the times where you don't draw it, your deck won't be as good. But with 3 copies, that's that's as much, that's as many as you can get of any other name, right? And so at that point, yeah, you can maybe build some really cohesive strategies.
Yeah, and like the other thing worth mentioning here is that like I think the cost, especially if they kind of start to have this runaway effect on the cost to create these competitive decks, do you feel like it'll have an impact on players' abilities to build towards one key deck that they want to be competitive with, or going wide with their deck selection, which could impact their like the fun factor, right? Playing the same deck over and over again, some people might love it, some people might not. I've been playing literally only a Fonus for 2 weeks, so because I'm trying to refine my deck. But once I have it down to where I want it, I don't want to just keep playing a Fonus nonstop. I want to build a Bravos deck, damn it. I want to play some Kojo and Buddha. I want to do some other stuff. But if it's like, hey, to do that, you got to spend $800 to get to a deck that can actually be competitive, that feels a bit rough, right? So I kind of wonder about the impact on the player enjoyment factor, where you have to consider, okay, do I just build into one deck, or do I try to have a wide collection of different brews that I can turn to?
Yeah, I absolutely see that, even for myself already, because I found these like uniques that I really enjoyed for Waru that I think are like really strong. And so, yeah, this week, instead of trying to switch to a new deck, I was just playing Waru without Robin Hoods, because it felt like, to me, it's like, dang, if I switch to anything else, I do have to either just play no unique cards, or pretty poor unique cards that like don't really fit my deck. And so that is tough. It is hard for people trying to prepare for a tournament. Maybe you can't even try all of the decks leading up to the tournament, because you can only try the ones that you actually like have the cards to play. And with like a cost ceiling, it might mean that you I don't know, you might not really be able to just switch which deck you're playing each week. So for someone who wants to be able to play all of the decks, it might feel disappointing to them that the uniques are so hard to attain, and they might feel like, yeah, you are kind of locked into playing either only a couple decks or weaker versions of those decks without uniques if you like want to switch for a week. I don't think you're going to be able to just hop on like Board Game Arena and try a hero you've never played before and expect to have like perfect uniques for it in your collection. That's something that you'd have to look for with time. I think like though maybe like the like final hope, or like that like saving grace, is it is just 3 cards. And I think with time, we're in the expansion 1, but in the future, if I don't play Ortis for maybe like a year or 2, and suddenly I want to go back to it, or like there's a new Ortis hero I want to try, I might still have those uniques sitting around from the first expansion that I used in my competitive deck that I could slot into this new deck. And so I think that every card game player who's like played for several years knows that you do start to build up a collection. You start to have those binders. You have like, now you have like the deck you played at the most recent tournament, but you also have the ones from like the 2 years previous or whatever. And so it's like, I think that 3 cards is small enough that over time you probably could find 3 good uniques for each faction. Maybe like the first expansion you'll focus on one hero, and then in the second expansion you switch over to another one. But I think it wouldn't be too hard over like around like 1 or 2 years for a lot of players to get enough uniques that this transition won't be as much of a burden at that point moving forward. Because now if you want to switch to like a different hero that you haven't tried, you'll at least have like some baseline level of like quality unique, I think, in your collection. And at this point, we're just starting from so little, from nothing, that it really feels like such like a cost to have to try and find these cards with our time and like our money. But over time, as our collections expand, you said you had 45 uniques. Well, once set 2 comes around and you open more displays, like that number might double or something. And so I think that with time, people will have enough unique cards, and there will just be enough around that it might not be as hard to fill out your decks. But yeah, especially in this first expansion where some people only opened starter decks or like 1 display, you might just not be there yet. And I don't think that in the long run, though, that necessarily would be a crippling problem.
And it's also important to note that like uniques as a whole, like this is a very innovative thing that they're doing here, right? It's not like that they were able to kind of take a look at like what, other card games had necessarily done and learn those lessons. Like, they're trying to be innovative. They're trying to be trailblazers here. Not to mention, I'm still floored every time I play Unique online. I'm like, I don't know how they coded this to work, and it just works, right? It's really an impressive thing. And so, like, this is one of the most exciting elements of Altered. And I think it's right that we have this conversation that kind of brings up some of the concerns, and some of these will get ironed out over time, I'm sure. And what you just mentioned is exactly the point too, that some of these uniques will age like fine wine, right? And that like uniques that you have in your collection will suddenly see the light of day once you realize like, oh, it's actually going to work very well in this new emerging archetype that's utilizing, these new types of tokens or whatever might come out in the future, right? And also there'll be new uniques being printed as well. Another point that's worth mentioning here is, how do you feel like uniques potentially impact draft? Because I actually really like the draft mode. I think draft is one of my favorite ways to play this game. I think it's remarkably well conceived. But let's be honest, pulling some absolute banger uniques, even just one banger unique in a draft deck, which obviously has a lower deck number, which means you're going to be drawing into that unique more often, that can have a pretty high impact on the draft results.
Yeah, I think that is probably the case. If you got a really good generic unique, it could give you like an advantage. And I don't know if that's like much different though from the way the constructed scene is going to look. If you draw some of these key cards, it will make you play like at a different level than if like they were in like the bottom of your deck or something. And so yeah, I guess it just kind of makes it so that draft gives you that same feeling where you can't have these random cards you've never seen before show up there, just like in a constructed event. I think that there probably is going to be a cost, just like with anything, to putting those uniques in your deck, because it does mean you'd have to play that color. And so unless it lined up with the color you were already drafting, it might mean that you're having to like forego some of the other cards that you've been setting aside for your deck. Also, a lot of times uniques have extra costs maybe associated with them, or like pretty situational effects. And so, yeah, I don't know if a lot of times I think even a unique that might be super good in like constructed play, it might not just naturally fit into a draft deck, because if it requires you to have tokens or boosts or something, you might not have like the right other cards to pair with it to pull that off. So I don't know. I think I'm not too worried about unique's impact in draft. I almost think it's maybe like just adds more than it takes away. And I feel like draft is also like a slightly less competitive format anyway, and maybe a lot of players who are drafting, it's either like newer players or more casually with your friends. And I think everyone knows sometimes that there are like certain, even if it wasn't a unique, there might just be certain like high rarity cards that'll be the first out of the pack, and whoever draws them in their games, even like in a game without uniques, could probably have a similar result.
Yeah, there's no question. And again, I'm actually really excited for the future of what uniques have in store and like what Alter has in store in general. I thought it was important to have this conversation because it is one of the most unique things, not to, no pun intended, unique things that Altered's doing, but it brings up a lot of question marks. And I don't want it to be the type of thing that could potentially turn people away from playing the game, because I think it is one of the most fascinating elements of it. We also don't really have much clarity yet as to whether or not the marketplace will have the opportunity to like can I lend you, like if you see like, hey Alex, man, oh that Jeanne d'Arc unique was just perfect for my deck, can I lend this to Trickster for 2 weeks or for a certain amount of time, or we could just trade backsies, I guess. But is there a way to lend your decks, your cards, and stuff like that, which I think has been something that's been asked in the past, considering the idea of this digital ownership component, right? So there might be some ways where like you can kind of get around the cost to say like, hey, like, Trickster, I know you have that one unique. Can I borrow it for this tournament on this weekend? And we can digitally just, you can lend it to me digitally for that weekend. I print on demand it or whatever, right? So there are potentially ways they can be creative to minimize the impact on the wallet versus unique kind of acquisition.
Yeah, I feel like I do want to chime in on this a little bit, because yeah, this is kind of something I've been like saving in my head to like kind of just throw on at the end as like the cherry on top, like that like hope that we've like said all of our concerns, but now let's talk about like the joys and like the hopes that we have. And I think that, yeah, one of like the saving things for the unique systems would be if they can implement a lending feature as you've described. And I don't want to speak for Equinox or anything, but I believe in some of the official communications we've received in the past, they have said that they do plan to provide this feature. So we don't have like all of the details yet, but it would probably be something as you described where you can give a card to someone without the worry that they will have to return it to you because you can like put a timer on it or something. And so we don't know exactly what it looks like, but it does sound like that is part of the plan, that people should be able to lend their cards digitally to a friend. That friend can print them, or you could just give them a copy too or something. But even if they lost it, you'd still be able to print another one later. And I think that this, in my mind, will probably eliminate a lot of the fears we've had of uniques being so unattainable, because maybe I can't find the cards myself, but if I have like a team or a friend who has powerful cards, they can lend them to me with essentially like no risk. And I think that as long as we build a community that's friendly and wants to help each other, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people are able to find the cards that they need, even if they don't own them, just to be able to like play an event at their locals, even on short notice. And so, yeah, I think that that's something that gets me very hopeful. For this last tournament I went to, leading up to the event, I was borrowing two of the cards that I was going to play. And so I did own one of them, but the other two, I kind of had to lend them the old-fashioned way, where I had like a friend send me them in the mail, and then we transferred them digitally, and I transferred them back. And so that already gave me the opportunity to be able to play cards that I didn't own in an event and be able to kind of have access to things that I couldn't either afford originally or couldn't find. And so I think that will only get easier if we get like an official way to do this lending. And yeah, I feel like I actually lent 3 cards. I lent 3 unique cards to one of my friends who played in the event as well and things. And so I think that even if people have a hard time buying and acquiring these cards on their own, I would really hope that amongst the entire community that there are plenty of good unique cards to go around, and that people at like stores and stuff are willing to lend their cards temporarily to a friend, because essentially you can both use them and there's not that much of a cost in this game where you're not as worried about like the physical ownership or like having to really have risk there with lending.
Yeah, it's actually a great point, and like whether or not the card gets damaged or whatever, right? I think that it's also worth noting that like with the way that we can utilize the print on demand system, it's like you can trade the card, they can print it, have it sent to them, which kind of eliminates that, oh, I'm going to courier it to you or whatever, right? And I think that like there's the element that we don't have it yet in the app where you can essentially register. I think you're supposed to be able to register for tournaments and stuff like that, like in Constructed via the app, which will actually take your deck and register it. So it'll keep tabs of what your digital collection is like. So it prevents you from just, print on demanding a bunch of my cards, showing up with a bunch of uniques and being like, hey, yeah, these are my cards or whatever, right? I believe that the LGSs will be able to kind of see what your account like permissions are, what decks and cards you have access to, so that you only bring those cards. I mean, anybody that's played in like any sort of tournament or whatever in Constructed in any game, you usually often have to do a pen and paper version of like your deck list, submit it, have it approved and all that stuff. So that's not any different. However, it's going to be digitally through the app directly to verify your digital ownership, which should work hand in hand with this digital lending system that we've discussed. So are there anything that you kind of want to mention here in closing about the general uniques, any concerns, any positives, or just anything you think that we need to talk about?
I think that we've done a pretty thorough job. I think that kind of like the two sides of the spectrum for me right now are like the excitement of having like infinite deck building possibilities, and just like some uniques are so powerful that it just feels like it can bring the potential to make incredible decks. And then that's just kind of like balanced out on the other side with the fear that maybe some of these chase cards will be so good that it will make the rest of the uniques obsolete, or that it'll just be like super expensive to tame them. And so yeah, I just hope, like kind of like some last wishes for Equinox, if they're listening, I just hope that they can kind of strike a balance in the balance of uniques to where it feels like the ones that are good aren't so good that they kind of outshine all the rest so that it can still keep a larger pool of the uniques viable for like the highest level competitive decks, and that just that lending system and the online marketplace can hopefully make finding the cards you want a lot more accessible, so that if you do see something cool in someone's deck, you actually might have a chance to be able to play it yourself in the future.
And it does make every game unique, right? Again, no pun intended, but the idea of these uniques is that like it provides a flavor to each individual game, each competitive match, where they can't just fully 100% net deck any given deck, and that those 3 cards are at least going to be something different, something that has a little bit of flavor to it, something that puts a spin on their play that is unique to that player, right? And even when you're playing, it's the cards that they're not anticipating, the effects they're not anticipating, what they cannot necessarily account for, right? Because in other games, I kind of know what's in their deck. They're playing the meta thing. I know what's in it. I know what their win conditions are. With this, in Altered, maybe you don't know what their win condition is, because maybe their 3 uniques are so tight that they are the win conditions and you have no idea what they say. So it does provide a lot of replayability from that standpoint. And ultimately, I'm excited. I'm excited for the release of the marketplace, but I'm tentatively concerned as well for what it might do to the acquisition of uniques for specifically the competitively minded player. Thank you so much for joining us today. We genuinely appreciate it. As always, Trickster's socials are listed down below in the description and in the pinned comment there. Definitely take a look at his amazing YouTube channel, which I absolutely enjoy kind of watching and viewing. And guys, thank you for joining us. We hope to see you on the next week of Altered Insights.